A new study suggests Canada outperformed peer countries during the first 2 years of the COVID-19 pandemic. And this is thanks to our public health measures and a successful vaccine campaign. The research was published in the Canadian Medical Association Journal on Monday. Researchers compared data from 11 countries. The study's co-author says Canada had the highest vaccination rate, the lowest infection rate, and the lowest death rate. Well, joining us now to talk more on this is Dr. Arthur Slutsky, scientist at St. Michael's Hospital and senior author of this study. Dr. Slutsky, welcome to Forum Daily.
Thanks very much for having me, Nima.
So let's start with the main findings from the study and how it was conducted, Doctor.
Well, there's a couple of main findings. The first one is one you've already said, and that's that Canada did very well in terms of overall infections, mortality rate from COVID, and something called excess death rates. So that's the first finding. The second finding is related to the potential mechanisms by which this could occur. And we found that if you looked at the restrictive measures that were had in Canada, they were somewhat greater than other countries, and that Canadians likely, although this didn't come from the data, likely applied the restrictions more than some other countries. But importantly, in terms of vaccination rate, we started a little bit late compared to the United States, for example, but by Canada Day last year, July 1st, 2021, we exceeded the vaccination rate on a per capita basis compared to the United States. We think that that had an impact. And the third thing is the price we paid for all this. There is a price to pay, and then from an economic perspective, we have inflation like much of the rest of the world. We're sort of the middle there. In terms of unemployment, we have unemployment. So we paid a price, and that price is basically to save lives and help the healthcare system.
Well, it sounds like the overall results were positive compared to these other countries. So we mentioned 11 countries were compared in the study. What were these countries? And did Canada outperform all 11 countries?
Yeah, so it was the G10 countries. I won't list all of them, but the United States, the United Kingdom, France, Belgium, Italy, Japan. So out of those 11 countries, Canada did very well. In terms of mortality, we didn't win compared to all the countries, but we did much better than all countries except for Japan. Japan did much better than us. When we looked at the number of deaths, for example, our deaths were about a third of those per capita of the United States. The next highest country actually had about 30% higher mortality compared to Canada. So we did very well. We were not the best in that regard, but we were in the top two in the G10 countries.
And staying on the topic of mortalities during the COVID-19 pandemic, how did Canada, or rather, if Canada were to follow the trajectory of other countries like the United States in terms of deaths, how many deaths could have Canada had due to COVID-19?
Well, if we had the same mortality rate as the United States, we would have had something like another 60 to 70,000 deaths in Canada till the end of February of this year. I mean, that's a huge number, right? So, when we think about the price we paid, there was a price, but there are a lot of people alive today that wouldn't have been alive if we hadn't taken those steps that we took.
And a huge number indeed. Now, bringing this back to Canadian viewers, how did the response among everyday Canadian citizens during the pandemic compare to those in other peer countries?
Well, we don't have exact data on that. We have restrictions that the government sort of imposed on Canadians and the rest of the other countries. And so we don't have data that said how well did people stick to those restrictions. From my understanding on other data, we did very well. Compared to the United States, for example, Canadians in general were stuck most closely to the restrictions, much closer than a number of other countries. And that, I think, is important because that had, I think, a major impact early on in the pandemic when there weren't vaccines. So this was a critical factor in keeping our people alive, and mainly the elderly and those disadvantaged. That's where the mortality was the greatest. So it had a very big impact totally.
All right, Dr. Slutsky, a quick 45 seconds left here, but where is Canada at now in terms of COVID-19 and the pandemic overall?
Well, I think we're in reasonable shape right now. But to be honest, there's a concern. Going forward, if we stay like we are now, I think we'll be fine. But we don't know what's going to happen in the future. We don't know if there's going to be another variant similar to Omicron that might be more deadly coming down at us in the future. So we have to be prepared. I think that the reason this paper was important was it said to Canadians, look, if you follow the restrictions, etc., yeah, it hurts, but it has a big impact. And it's possible that in the fall or later on, the government's going to say, based on science, that we have to take some more restrictions. We might have to wear masks more. And quite frankly, that if that's the case, hopefully will save lives.